Hello, my name is Adrian.
My name is Kunj.
And my name is Michelle.
Today we will look at how audience affects the content and language in political speeches. In a political context, language can be used to facilitate campaigns and direct intervention, as a politician may utilize different language for varying audiences. We will explore how audience has a major influence on the language used in political speeches and debates by analyzing real-life examples.
In this video, we will break down interviews with President Barack Obama about abortion. By doing so, we can identify the specific moments where the two politicians speak in a manner that is specific to the audience that they are addressing.
In a more focused audience, the use of doublespeak is limited. We will create our own example capturing this theme through interviews with a fictional politician, Mr. Richard Weems, discussing net neutrality on two different TV networks, MSNBC and Fox News. This structured group discussion method will examine the way and the medium through which a message is communicated.
The following speech about abortion was given by Barack Obama at the University of Notre Dame in 2009. Clearly, you can see that President Obama is getting a warm reception. While the university is primarily Catholic, therefore lending towards a more conservative stance on abortion, as a university, it is certainly a predominantly progressive and accepting environment for such controversial topics as abortion. Keep this in mind as President Obama begins his speech.
The soldier and the lawyer may both love this country with equal passion and yet reach very different conclusions on the specific steps needed to protect us from harm. The gay activist and the evangelical pastor may both deplore the ravages of HIV/AIDS, but find themselves unable to bridge the cultural divide that might unite their efforts. Those who speak out against stem cell research may be rooted in an admirable conviction about the sacredness of life, but so are the parents of a child with juvenile diabetes who are convinced that their son's or daughter's hardships might be relieved.
It is important to note here how President Obama warms up the audience to the very controversial topic of abortion. He opens up this part of the speech with a relatively uncontroversial topic, discussing how best to, quote, protect us from harm. He continues to talk about increasingly more controversial topics, such as gay rights, AIDS, and stem cell research. Next, he will discuss the elephant in the room, abortion. Had he began this speech by directly tackling abortion, he wouldn't have been accepted by his mostly Catholic audience.
The question then is, how do we work through these conflicts? Is it possible for us to join hands in common effort as citizens of a vibrant and varied democracy? How do we engage in vigorous debate? How does each of us remain firm in our principles and fight for what we consider right, without, as Father John said, demonizing those with just as strongly held convictions on the other side?
You may have noticed that the president hadn't said anything substantial for the past 45 seconds of the speech, another example of warming up the audience. Instead of jumping into abortion just yet, he voiced very uncontroversial views, such as the desire to, quote, join hands in common effort and, quote, fight for what we consider right.
That's when we begin to say, maybe we won't agree on abortion, but we can still agree that this heart-wrenching decision.
And there it is, the dreaded A word. Notice how from this point on, Obama makes his views on abortion very clear. We will compare this to the next speech that we cover.
For any woman is not made casually. It has both moral and spiritual dimensions. So let us work together to reduce the number of women seeking abortions. Let's reduce unintended pregnancies. Let's make adoption more available. Let's provide care and support for women who do carry their children to term.
One important thing to note is that President Obama never said that he is pro-life in this speech. Instead, the point of this speech was to attempt to get the people of Notre Dame to get on common ground. This is reflected in his language, as he only discusses safe topics that everyone there could agree with. In this speech, President Obama was very confident because of the welcoming audience, a stark contrast to our next speech. Let's begin that now.
This interview was given to Senator Obama while he was running for president by Reverend Rick Warren on CNN. Of course, as this speech is in a public television environment, unlike the previous example, President Obama has to be a bit more careful about what he says, as it's being broadcasted to a much wider audience. In short, the audience is not in general agreement with the senator.
I am pro-choice. I believe in Roe versus Wade, and I come to that conclusion not because I'm pro-abortion, but because ultimately I don't think women make these decisions casually. I think they wrestle with these things in profound ways, in consultation with their pastors or their spouses or their doctors, their family members. And so for me, the goal right now should be, and this is where I think we can find common ground, and by the way, I've now inserted this into the Democratic Party platform, is how do we reduce the number of abortions? Because the fact is that although we've had a president who's opposed to abortion over the last 8 years, abortions have not gone down.
So far, the president has been expressing similar sentiments as the previous example. Notice how he stresses that he is pro-choice, not pro-life or pro-abortion. This is a clever way to disagree with core Christian beliefs, but still hold his own agenda. This, specifically, is one example of tweaking language to fit an audience. He never mentioned pro-choice in the previous speech because he never needed to. Also notice how Obama's confidence is much less than in the previous speech. He can't come across as egotistical to such a relatively hostile audience.
And that, I think, is something that we have to ask
ourselves. Have you ever
ourselves.
voted to limit or reduce abortions?
Clearly, this is a very loaded question in favor of the Reverend. Of course, Senator Obama has not done this to an extent that is favorable to most devout Catholics. Thus, Obama cannot answer the question directly. This is where the concept of doublespeak comes in. Keep this in mind when listening to his response.
Well, I am in favor, for example, of limits on late-term abortions, if there is an exception for the mother's health. Now, from the perspective of those who are pro-life, I think they would consider that inadequate. And I respect their views. I mean, one of the things that I've always said is that on this particular issue, if you believe that life begins at conception, then, and you are consistent in that belief, then I can't argue with you on that, because that is a core issue of faith for you. What I can do is say, are there ways that we can work together to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies so that we actually are reducing the sense that women are seeking out abortion.
As you can see, instead of saying no outright, Senator Obama redirected the discussion to his pro-choice mandate. At this point, he has not asserted any of his personal views at all that could be considered unfavorable by Catholics, even though he may hold certain views.
By looking at these examples of President Obama, we wanted to take the element of specific language and apply it to our own political recreation.
Good evening, America, and welcome to Fox News. My name is Eric Paul, and tonight we will be covering the national issue of net neutrality and how Democratic presidential candidate and Senator Richard Weems plans to address the problem. Currently, two different sides, the individuals and the companies, present opposing opinions. We now go to Heather Lawler, who had the opportunity to speak to Senator Weems.
Thank you, Eric, and I'd like to thank you for somehow coming onto our show today, Mr. Weems.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm glad to have the opportunity to finally come onto your network.
So everyone's been wondering, we're all dying to know, how do you plan on dealing with the issues that arise from net neutrality while maintaining the needs of businesses across the nation?
Well, net neutrality is a complex issue. Business firms, whether whether it be a group that's just starting up or an established corporation, provide to our economy in many ways. Generally speaking, my plan is to simply take control of that issue and then ultimately resolve it.
What do you plan on doing to regulate the government control over businesses, as many feel as though stopping the large companies from having the resources they will need will be detrimental to our economy?
I feel as though those issues will only be resolved when we communicate and we work together to solve it. Businesses help our economy, and that is always a good thing, and the government will support those businesses while allowing smaller businesses to also prosper.
But, Mr. Weems, many companies have also seen your previous statements as threatening to their well-being.
I appreciate all the work that they do, and our economy is always important.
But you really haven't answered the question. I'm Pat D'Amico King, and tonight we present to you an interview with presidential candidate Richard Weems on the topic of net neutrality. Net neutrality is the principle that internet service providers should enable access to all content and applications regardless of the source. We now go to MSNBC senior political correspondent Michael Leva, who is live at our studio in New York.
Thank you, Pat. Welcome to the show, Mr. Weems.
Thank you, I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with the very general question. What are your overall thoughts on the current political debate of net neutrality?
I've been very clear on my thoughts on net neutrality. I think that net neutrality is something that the American people just need to have. There should be no so-called gatekeepers to the internet. In fact, if I were to be elected as president, I would fight for the FCC to classify internet access as a utility. Therefore, internet access can never be controlled by monopolizing internet service providers, even though there would be a high regulatory burden.
And also, do you plan to protect the free speech of Americans on the internet? And if so, how do you plan to do so?
Of course, as a presidential candidate, I find it to be my duty to protect the rights of everyone. This goes all the way back to the very foundations of the United States. Free speech has become our defining trait. And to protect this fundamental right, I'm going to ensure that internet service providers treat all internet lines equally. ISPs can't have preferential treatment over certain sites or customers or data in general.
And how do you plan to respond to lobbyists, interest groups, or other proponents of internet service providers who obviously would be against your net neutrality agenda?
I feel that even though it may be inconvenient for them, it is still important for us as politicians to protect the fundamental mores of the American people. There are certain rights that are, in the words of our founding fathers, inalienable, and net neutrality is one of them.
Excellent. Now on to our next question.
In order to create an effective and accurate recreation, we took the key themes and ideas seen from the analysis of President Obama's discourse. In our first example featuring Fox News, we can see how politicians may use language in the form of doublespeak to manipulate undesirable questions and circumvent answers. The interviewer had asked Mr. Weems on his stance about net neutrality 3 times, yet he fails to directly respond each time. It is clear that he supports net neutrality as he does not want to clearly state how his plans affect businesses. In order to hide his stance to the audience, which is businesses in this case, he speaks very broadly, such as when he says, "Generally speaking, my plan is to simply take control of the issue and then ultimately resolve it." It is obvious that companies will have issues with his plan, yet Mr. Weems does not specify how he wants to resolve the problem. However, with the second example with MSNBC, we can see a smaller usage of doublespeak because Mr. Weems is now addressing an audience of regular people who are in favor of net neutrality. He speaks very openly. For example, he states, "Of course, I have been very clear on my thoughts on net neutrality." This major difference in language can be drawn to the fact that the first example was delivered to individuals and the second was given to businesses. Through our analysis and 2 recreations, we can see how an audience is a major impact on the language found in political speeches. Thank you, and this has been our further oral presentation.